The call came in at 11:52 p.m. on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and by the time the ambulances started rolling into the bay at Mercy General Chicago, the ER was already running on fumes. 3 vehicles. A jackknifed semi on I-90. 17 injured, 4 critical. Isla Tran was mopping up a spilled IV bag near curtain 4 when the radio crackled. She didn't run. She never ran. She moved the way she always moved. Quietly, efficiently, like someone trying not to be noticed, and pushed the mop bucket against the wall, stripped off her gloves, and walked toward the trauma bay without anyone asking her to. Nobody asked Isla Tran to do much of anything. She was 31 years old and had been working as a patient care technician at Mercy General for 14 months. A PCT, a tech. The person who drew blood, changed linens, took vitals, and occasionally reminded the attending physicians that a patient in room 7 had been waiting 40 minutes for pain medication. She wore navy scrubs that were slightly too big for her. She kept her hair pulled back in a low knot. She didn't chat at the nurse's station. She didn't go to the holiday parties. She brought her lunch in a brown paper bag and ate it in the stairwell on the 4th floor, alone. The staff called her Quiet Isla, not to her face, but she knew. She always knew. What none of them knew, what no one at Mercy General had any reason to suspect, was that 3 years earlier, Isla Tran had been a trauma surgeon with the 75th Ranger Regiment. That she had performed field surgeries in conditions no civilian hospital could imagine. That she had a record so classified it existed in exactly 2 places: a locked server at Fort Bragg and the memory of a 2-star general who had personally pinned a commendation to her chest in a tent outside Mosul. She had walked away from all of it, quietly, the way she did everything. Tonight, she would not be quiet enough. The first critical came in at 11:58. A 47-year-old man, blunt chest trauma, 3 broken ribs, tension pneumothorax developing on the left side. The paramedics were still calling out vitals when Dr. Conrad Stahl swept into the bay with the energy of a man who believed his arrival alone could stabilize a patient. Stahl was the chief of emergency surgery. 53 years old, silver-haired, the kind of physician whose diplomas took up an entire wall. He had a handshake like a press conference and a voice that carried down hallways. He was, as far as anyone at Mercy General was concerned, the best trauma surgeon in the building. He was also, Isla had noticed in 14 months of quiet observation, the kind of surgeon who performed best when the case was clean, the nurses were attentive, and the patient's chart confirmed what he already expected to find. Needle decompression, left side. Stahl called out, "Get me a chest tube tray. Where's my fellow?" Dr. Priya Anand was already at the patient's left side, gloved up. Priya was a second-year surgical fellow, 30 years old, brilliant in the way that people who had never failed at anything were brilliant, which meant she was also sometimes brittle. She liked Stahl, because Stahl liked people who reflected his confidence back at him. Neither of them paid any attention to Isla, who was standing at the supply cart, handing instruments to the scrub nurse, without being asked, because she had already read the room and knew exactly what was coming next. The second critical arrived 6 minutes later. This one was worse. Male, 61 years old. The paramedic rattled off the stats as they wheeled him through. BP 74/40, heart rate 128, GCS of 9. Suspected internal hemorrhage, abdomen rigid and distending on the right side. His name, according to the ID in his wallet, was Arthur Mack. He was wearing a watch that cost more than Isla's monthly rent and a U.S. District Court lanyard still clipped to his jacket. A federal judge. Isla clocked that detail the same way she clocked everything, silently, without reaction. She moved to the second bay. There were 2 other ER physicians on that night. Dr. Hendricks, who was managing a pediatric seizure down the hall, and Dr. Vo, who was elbow-deep in a laceration repair on one of the semi-driver's passengers. The surgical residents were all tied up in the OR upstairs. Stahl was the only attending trauma surgeon available, and Stahl was still working on the first critical, which left Arthur Mack bleeding into his abdominal cavity with no one senior enough to make a call. Priya Anand came through the curtain at 12:09 a.m. Her face was the controlled kind of calm that meant she was not calm at all. Ultrasound is showing significant free fluid in Morrison's pouch, she said, scrolling through the portable images on the screen. He needs an X-lap. Now, is stall free? He's still in with curtain 1. Chest tubes in, but the patient's destabilizing. Then we need to page cardiothoracic. I did. On-call CT is 40 minutes out. He was at a dinner in Evanston. 40 minutes. Isla did the math. Arthur Mack's pressure was 68/38 now. He didn't have 40 minutes. Priya stood at the foot of the gurney, staring at the ultrasound screen, and Isla could see the exact moment when the fellow's training and her fear ran directly into each other. Priya Anand could perform an exploratory laparotomy. She had done them in the lab. She had assisted in dozens. She had never opened a patient this unstable on her own, without an attending present, without a net. We need to get him to the OR, Priya said. I'll call upstairs and find a resident to scrub in. He won't make it upstairs. It came out before Isla decided to say it. She didn't raise her voice. She said it the way she said everything, level, direct, with no particular emphasis. But Priya's turned around slowly, and the look on her face was the look of someone who had just been interrupted by the furniture. Excuse me? His pressure is dropping faster than the trend line suggests. He's compensating right now, but he's going to crater within the next 8 to 12 minutes. If you move him to an elevator and then to an OR, you'll lose him in transit. Priya blinked. You're a tech. I know. You drew his blood 20 minutes ago. I did. And while I was doing that, I could feel that his abdomen was guarding on the right lower quadrant in a pattern consistent with active hepatic hemorrhage, not splenic. The free fluid is probably from a lacerated right lobe. The room got very quiet, not silent. Monitors were still beeping. Someone was shouting down the hall. The hospital was doing what hospitals do at midnight after a mass casualty event. But in that specific curtain bay, something shifted. Priya stared at her. How do you know that? Isla didn't answer the question. You have everything you need in this bay to do a damage control laparotomy. You're capable of opening him. What you need is someone who can control the bleeding while you're managing the field. I can do that. You can. Priya stopped. Started again. You're telling me you can assist in emergency abdominal surgery. You. A patient care tech. I'm telling you that if you don't open him in the next 7 minutes, he's going to arrest, and then it won't matter what anyone's credentials are. Priya looked at the monitors. She looked at Arthur Mack, at the gray color spreading under his skin, at the shallow, rhythmic way his chest was moving, at the distension that had visibly increased in the last 4 minutes. She was a smart woman. She could see what the numbers said. She could also see that she was 20 seconds away from making the most consequential decision of her career. In the middle of the night, with a patient care technician standing across from her, telling her to do something that had no protocol to support it and no supervisor to authorize it, and approximately 1,000 ways to go wrong. If I let you scrub in, Priya said carefully, and something happens. Then it happens, Isla said. But right now, something is already happening. Priya looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned to the scrub nurse. Get me a laparotomy tray, full trauma setup, and someone get Dr. Stahl out of curtain 1 as soon as he's able. She looked back at Isla. Scrub in. Isla moved to the sink with the same unhurried efficiency that had defined her for 14 months. And as she scrubbed, she felt the particular stillness that always came over her in these moments. The one that had taken 2 years of Ranger deployments to build and 3 years of civilian life to almost forget. It came back completely, in about 4 seconds, like muscle memory, like breathing. She gloved up. She gowned. She stepped to the patient's right side. Priya made the incision. The moment the peritoneum was open, blood welled up, dark and fast, more than either of them had wanted to see. Priya controlled her intake of breath. Isla was already reaching in, both hands finding the field by feel in the way she had learned to do, in conditions where the lights were a headlamp and the table was a door balanced on 2 sawhorses. Right lobe, Isla confirmed, her voice flat and professional. Posterior segment. Lacerations about 6 centimeters. The bleeding's arterial. You've got a branch of the right hepatic artery involved. Can we pack it? Packing won't hold an arterial bleed this size. You need direct pressure while I expose the portal triad, then Pringle maneuver to reduce flow while you get a suture on the vessel. Priya hesitated for exactly 1 second. Walk me through it. And Isla did. She talked Priya through every step in the same tone she would have used to explain where the supply closet was or how to log into the timekeeping system. No drama, no urgency in her voice, even as her hands were moving with a precision that seemed to belong to a different person than the one who mopped up IV spills in the hallway. She occluded the hepatoduodenal ligament with one hand while Priya repositioned her instruments. She guided the fellow suturing without touching it, just describing angle, depth, tension until Priya found the vessel and controlled it. Arthur Mack's blood pressure, which had dropped to 54/30 at its lowest point, sank slowly. 61/34. Then 70/41. The scrub nurse exhaled. The circulating nurse, who had been standing very still near the door, like someone watching something they couldn't explain, put a hand briefly over her mouth. They were 22 minutes into the procedure when the curtain was pulled back and Dr. Conrad Stahl walked in. He took in the scene in pieces: the open abdomen, the controlled field, Priya Anand suturing with a steadiness that hadn't been there an hour ago, and Isla Tran, gloved and gowned, hands in a position of surgical assistance, doing something that was definitively not within the scope of a patient care technician's job description. Stahl didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "What in the hell is this?" Nobody answered him immediately. The monitors kept beeping. Priya kept working. Isla kept her eyes on the field. Dr. Anand. Stahl's voice had dropped to the register he used when he was controlling something that wanted to become anger. "Explain what I'm looking at." "Patient presented with active hepatic hemorrhage," Priya said without looking up. "Pressure was unsustainable for transport. I made the call to open in the bay. And her?" He gestured at Isla. "She's assisting. She's a tech. I know what she is." Stahl stepped closer to the table. He looked at the field, really looked at it, and something shifted in his expression. The bleeding was controlled. The suture line was clean. The patient's vitals, just now crossing back into survivable territory on the monitor above them, told a story that the setting had no right to produce. "Whose hands did that?" he asked. Quieter now. No one answered. He looked at Isla. She met his eyes once, briefly, then returned her attention to maintaining the pressure on the retractor. "Continue," he said. He scrubbed in. For the next 40 minutes, Conrad Stahl worked alongside Isla Tran without speaking to her directly. He watched her hands the way a person watches something they're trying to categorize. Something that doesn't fit in any file they already have. She held retraction without prompting. She anticipated every instrument need 3 seconds before it was requested. When he encountered a secondary bleed near the inferior margin of the laceration, she was already repositioning before he asked, and the angle she offered him was exactly correct. At one point, he stopped and looked at her across the table. Just for a moment. She didn't look back. Arthur Mack's pressure reached 98/60 as they were closing. It was 1:47 a.m. Stahl found her in the scrub sink at 2:15. She was rinsing her hands, still in her gown, methodical and unhurried as always. He stood in the doorway for a moment before he spoke. "Where did you train?" Isla kept rinsing. "I didn't." "Don't do that." His voice wasn't unkind. "I've been a surgeon for 26 years. I know what trained hands look like. I know what someone who learned in a simulation lab looks like, and I know what someone who learned in the field looks like. Your hands told me everything." She turned off the water, reached for the paper towels. "You performed a hepatic Pringle maneuver with one hand in a trauma bay with no imaging, no attending, no anesthesiologist, and a second-year fellow," Stahl continued. "You talked her through the suture on a hepatic artery branch. In 22 minutes. I want to know who you are." Isla dried her hands. She folded the paper towel in half, then in half again, the way she always did, a habit from a life she had tried to leave behind her. Finally, she looked at him. "I'm a PCT at Mercy General Chicago," she said. "That's all I am right now." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I can give you tonight." She walked past him, and he let her go because he was a smart man, and he could feel the outline of something larger than the conversation they were having. The official incident report that Dr. Conrad Stahl filed the following morning described the emergency laparotomy performed on Arthur Mack as a collaborative procedure conducted by Dr. Priya Anand under his authorization, with support from ancillary clinical staff during a mass casualty overflow event. It did not name Isla Tran. It also did not, notably, recommend any disciplinary action. Priya Anand came to find Isla at 11 o'clock that morning, in the stairwell on the 4th floor, where Isla was eating a sandwich. Priya sat down 2 steps above her. She was still wearing the same scrubs from the night before, and her eyes had the particular hollowness of someone who had not slept and had done a lot of thinking instead. "He's going to make it," Priya said. "Mac." They moved him to the ICU at 6 this morning. "His daughter flew in from DC Good," Isla said. "He's a federal judge. He was 3 weeks from beginning jury selection on a major organized crime prosecution. His clerk told one of our administrators that there had been threats." Isla took another bite of her sandwich. "The police came by at 8, Priya continued. "They want to look at the talk screen. Apparently someone in the ER noticed a puncture mark on his neck that the paramedics didn't document." Isla nodded slowly. "I noticed it too. When I drew his blood, I didn't say anything because I didn't want to slow down the decision to operate." Priya stared at her. "You think someone poisoned him?" "I think someone wanted him to seem like a car accident victim. The location and depth of the puncture was inconsistent with flying glass or restraint bruising, and his coagulopathy was slightly atypical for pure traumatic hemorrhage." She paused. "I could be wrong. You haven't been wrong yet." A long silence opened up between them. Below, somewhere in the hospital, a phone rang and then went to voicemail. "I'm not going to ask you what your real story is," Priya said finally. "I thought about it all night, and I decided I wasn't going to ask." Isla looked up. "Because I think if I knew," Priya continued, "I'd have to do something with that information. And whatever you've done to end up here, in navy scrubs, eating lunch alone in a stairwell, I think you probably had a reason." She paused. "You saved his life. Whatever else you are, you saved his life, and you walked me through it, and I'm not going to forget that." Isla held her gaze for a moment. Then she looked back down at her sandwich. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for making the call last night. That took nerve." Priya almost smiled. "I had a good assist." She stood up, straightened her scrubs, then, at the top of the stairwell, she stopped. "Stahl wants to meet with you," she said, officially. "He said to tell you there's no pressure, but he also said to tell you that he's had surgeons with 20 years of experience who couldn't do what you did last night, and he's not the kind of man who wastes that." She left. Isla sat in the stairwell for a long time after that, her sandwich half-eaten, her hands resting on her knees. Quiet hands, steady hands. Hands that knew how to do things she had spent 3 years trying to forget she knew. Through the narrow window above her, Chicago in November was gray and cold and indifferent, the way big cities are at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning when most of the world is somewhere else entirely. She watched a single pigeon navigate the updraft between 2 buildings, unsteady for a moment, then finding the current and leveling out. She thought about Arthur Mack's daughter, flying in from DC. She thought about a man who had 3 weeks until a jury trial and someone who didn't want him to see it. She thought about the fact that if someone had been willing to orchestrate a car accident and a poisoning to stop a federal prosecution, they were probably not finished. She thought about the meeting with Conrad Stahl. Then she folded the wax paper from her sandwich into a small, neat square, put it in her pocket, stood up, and walked back down the stairs toward the emergency department. She wasn't ready to be found. She wasn't sure she would ever be entirely ready. But Arthur Mack had a daughter who had just landed at O'Hare, and somewhere in this hospital, there was still a talk screen waiting to tell a story that someone very powerful did not want told. And Isla Tran had never been very good at walking away from a patient who still needed her.